Shalom, welcome. This is Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. And in today's edition, we will focus on a number of countries throughout the Middle East. Of course, first and foremost, we'll look at the situation between Israel and the Islamist Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Where are we currently at? Massive demonstrations here in Israel calling on the government to end the war, while at the same time Prime Minister Netanyahu doubles down on his intentions to defeat Hamas decisively. The strike by the Israeli Navy against the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, which continues to launch ballistic missiles towards Israeli territory. The latest remarks early this morning by U.S. Ambassador to Turkey and Special Envoy to both Syria and Lebanon, Mr. Tom Barrack, who met earlier today with Joseph Aoun, the president of Lebanon, and had some remarks with regard to the situation between Beirut and Jerusalem and the situation in Syria. And let's not forget also the Islamic Republic of Iran. So all of that and more. Let's introduce first our experts for today, to start, of course, with Dr. Mike Duran, who is a senior fellow and the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East at Hudson Institute, formerly a senior director at the National Security Council in Washington for the Middle East and North Africa. And next to him, we have Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, who also headed the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, and currently is the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, among others. So it's great to have both of you with us. And Dr. Duran, I'd like to start with you. A very eventful week passed also since our last edition of Deep Dive. What is the chief focus that we should start with today?
Well, Jonathan, I think the number one thing that is on most people's minds is Gaza, because of its, if I'm talking about the perspective from here in Washington, because of its ability to grab people's attention, and to grab the headlines and to crowd out the other news. Of course, the massive demonstration in Israel got a lot of play over here. No one really understands what Prime Minister Netanyahu's end game is in Gaza, and you get the feeling in talking to American officials that there's increasing impatience, I would say, and personally, I don't share that sense. When I look at the map of the Middle East or the map of the globe, I see a competition between the United States on the one hand, or the United States and its allies on the one hand, and China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea on the other. And Hamas is an element that the China, Russia, Iran coalition is using to undermine the American position in the Middle East by driving a wedge between Israel and the United States. One of the reasons why it's so effective in driving that wedge is that in American domestic politics, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict gets discussed without any connection generally to that larger global conflict. And I think it's our job to remind people all the time that Hamas is taking a very extreme position, refusing to compromise, because it will do everything it can. It will fight to the last Palestinian, to the last Gazan, in order to remain the dominant political power in the Gaza Strip, so it can go on serving its own jihadi ambitions, but also the ambitions of China, Russia, and Iran. So we should see it in that light, as an asset of the coalition against the United States, and we should see that Israel is in a real dilemma. Hamas built an incredibly large number of tunnels under the ground in Gaza, which are not there to protect Gazans at all, They're there to protect Hamas fighters, who put the Gazan civilians between themselves and Israel. If Israel carries out military actions to destroy those tunnels and the fighters who hide in them, according to the rules of war, as we all understand it, then it ends up destroying the basic infrastructure of Gaza. That's a decision that Hamas made to put the civilians and the basic civilian infrastructure between themselves and Israel. Any Western military faced with a threat like Hamas would do exactly the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, it's important to note to our viewers and listeners right now that when we're talking about the Islamist Hamas, Russia and China actually recognize this terrorist organization as the legitimate rulers of the Gaza Strip and the legitimate rulers of the Palestinian Authority. That is, since they view them as the victors of the last parliamentary or legislative council election that was held back in the mid 2000s. And that is something that they continue to highlight in the majority of their meetings on this issue specifically. And it was quite apparent that when Hamas also captured hostages with dual Israeli Russian nationality, but also Chinese nationals that were captured who were laborers on the southern border in various agricultural fields and such. They were freed by Hamas as overture to Beijing and Moscow. This did not happen to any of the Americans who were held, including Dan Alexander, who was an overture from the Qataris rather than Hamas, and that is something that needs to be put into context. Now, General Kuperwasser, this is an age of strategic power competition. To what degree does Israel also handle it in such a way, and to what degree is it able to communicate those challenges that it faces on the global stage to our American friends in Washington to ensure that there is a close coordination when we're talking about the strategic element of this issue?
Well, Israel is working hard in order to coordinate with the United States about this issue. And from an Israeli point of view, it's quite clear that defeating Hamas is not only defeating Hamas. It's important for Israel to defeat Hamas because of the Israeli-Palestinian context. But also it is important for Israel to do that because Israel feels itself as fighting on behalf of the liberal democracies. And Israel understands well that if we do not defeat Hamas, if we leave Hamas in power in Gaza, and allow the 7th of October go down in the Palestinian history as a very glorious achievement, then this is going to have repercussions on the security of the entire West and the pragmatic states of the Middle East. This is what's at stake here is much bigger than just what's going to happen between Israelis and Palestinians. Of course, Israelis are first and foremost concerned about what's going to happen to them, but the Israeli leadership and some of the Israelis also see the wider view of the wider perspective of what's going to happen if we do not win this war. And I think this is extremely important from an Israeli point of view. It's what we do not manage to explain to our friends beyond Washington is that they should help us in winning this war. The Americans understand it and they give us enough leeway in order to do what needs to be done. But although, as Mr. Duran said, Dr. Duran said, they are becoming less and less patient. But look at what's happening in the rest of the world. It's unbelievable. They actually side with Hamas. I mean, on the one hand, they say Hamas should be disarmed. That's very nice to say so. It's important. I don't underestimate it. But at the same time, they do everything in order to keep Hamas in power. So they ask for a ceasefire immediately and a lasting ceasefire and actually the end of the war right away, way before Hamas is removed from power. If this is going to happen, they actually shoot themselves in the leg. And it's very strange to understand it. One explanation is that they really buy the story that the Palestinians are the victims and the Israelis are the victimizers. That's very comfortable for them to have this worldview put back in place. And there is also probably some anti-Semitism into it. You cannot run away from that. And there's definitely a lot of politics that have to be taken into account when you look at what's happening in Europe and what's happening in Canada and in Australia. The Muslims have a much more presence over there than the Jews. And the representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood were let in many of these places to be seen as the representatives of the entire Muslim community. So this is the voice they hear from the Muslim communities, and they want to appease those Muslims communities around their homelands. And it's amazing. It's amazing to see the United Kingdom sides with Hamas. It's unbelievable what we see happening. And you know what? To the extent that the Australian government has decided today not to allow a member of Knesset, yes, from the right wing, but not an extremist like Simcha Rothman, they decided not to allow him enter Australia. To enter Australia, and this is after they denied the entry to former member of Knesset Ayelet Shaked, which is definitely a very moderate right wing, but very moderate right wing former member of Knesset and minister of Israel. That's how far these people went in order to support Hamas.
Sure. Well, it's baffling to see those type of trends, not only in Australia but in Canada, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in Germany, even to get to a point where they decide to stop the export of various military components to the Israeli Defense Ministry, components that, of course, earmarked for the war in Gaza. It's outrageous to see this, despite the fact that Friedrich Merz, the chancellor, pledged to never allow something like this to happen, and was actually the biggest critic of Schultz, who did not pull such a measure. So go figure. The double standards these days are outrageous. But nonetheless, we would like to move to our next topic, and that is over the weekend, we had another ballistic missile launch towards Israeli territory from Yemen by the Iranian proxy Ansar Allah, dominated, of course, by the Houthi tribe. Just merely a couple of days after they launched another one, every time they say that they strike Ben Gurion International Airport. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet, thankfully, in this context, except for once where it was on the fringes of the airport, and that drew a very significant retaliatory response. Now we had another retaliatory response by the Israeli Navy against energy infrastructure. Dr. Duran, what can you tell us about that?
The Houthis are a more formidable enemy than I think a lot of people realized. They have, after fighting for years against the Saudis and Emiratis, they learned to bury a lot of their infrastructure in very difficult terrain. And they have the support, of course, of Iran, and behind Iran, the Chinese, in certain ways, have helped the Houthis, and so no one is able, not the Israelis and not the Americans, when the Americans launched, when the Trump administration launched its campaign against the Houthis. They did not succeed in establishing air superiority over Yemen. It's difficult. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, Jonathan, but 15 MQ-9s, that's the Reaper drone of the United States, have been shot down over Yemen. The Israelis were able to establish air dominance over Iran because they were flying at a high altitude, and they could take out the air defense systems of the Iranians from a high altitude. These MQ-9s come in at a lower altitude and are susceptible to the air defense systems, including this attack drone that the Iranians have that loiter. It's a loitering drone that is an anti-drone drone. that has proved to be very effective. So the combination of the Houthis having developed their own industrial capacity. They have the ability to assemble at least, and I think to manufacture some parts of the missiles that they use. They need some parts from Iran itself, like guidance systems and so on. That's how I understand it. But they have assembly capabilities certainly, and some industrial production capability in Yemen. It's hardened infrastructure in a very hostile terrain in a very large country, and there just aren't that many targets that you can hit that will really set them back militarily. So this is going to take a lot longer than a lot of us thought. Another issue is that the Houthis themselves, they don't. We tend to, when we think of them, tend to think of them simply as an appendage of Iran. But that's not how they see themselves. They see themselves as the toughest element, the cutting edge, toughest element of the resistance axis. In some ways, they see themselves as tougher, certainly tougher than Hezbollah, but even tougher than the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps.
Well, they identify as, right?
Identify, yeah, they identify as,
yeah. Last week there was a UN Security Council meeting during the course of which the head of the UN Coordination Division for Humanitarian Matters came out and stated that Yemen is now one of the most food insecure countries in the world. So just to put things in context, this Iranian proxy is just depriving the Yemeni people and utilizing everything in their power to fight and to do whatever their masters in Tehran direct them to do. Of course, they establish parameters and operate within that context. One of the most devastating, I think, consequences of this war is the case study that the Chinese are holding with regard to the frustration of freedom of navigation in a strategic strait, namely Bab el-Mandeb, which will have dire consequences, likely, in the event that China will like to further expand those type of belligerent activities, also in the Pacific. So we spoke initially about strategic power competition. It's global, in essence, and that is something that needs to be taken into account. Now, in that same meeting, we did hear also the special envoy of the Secretary General, Hans Grunberg, coming out and stating that for Yemen to have a real chance for peace, speaking about domestic issues right now, it must be protected from being further drawn into the ongoing regional turmoil emanating out of the war in Gaza. So the UN seems to try and make a connection with the Gaza war. He continued by claiming that, therefore, the strikes against civilian ships in the Red Sea must cease, the missiles attacks against Israel, and the subsequent Israeli strikes on Yemen must also come to an end beyond complicating the mediation space for a long-term settlement of the conflict in Yemen. This escalation has led to the near destruction of Yemen's west coast port facilities. That is quite significant statement to be made. Now, General Kupelwasser, last I checked, every time the Houthis launch a ballistic missile towards Israel, there were a number of statements that came out of Jerusalem where they said, well, we will hold their masters in Tehran responsible. Where is that currently in the calculus? And are we expected to see some type of more of a forceful reaction to the one directing and equipping the Houthis rather than the ones who are pulling the trigger?
Well, we already held Iran responsible, and we did all kinds of things in Iran. They already suffered a lot. And the point here is, Duran said that we underestimated the insistence, persistence of the Houthis in carrying out this war. Look, Hezbollah, which is a much better armed organization than the Houthis, at a certain point said enough is enough. We don't want to be involved in this solidarity campaign with Hamas. We had enough. Houthis are not convinced yet that they should say the same thing. And the main problem with the Houthis, of course, the missiles are a problem by themselves, but the main problem with the Houthis is was said here, that they block the free shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb area. And this affects both the Egyptians and us. The port of Eilat is almost non-functioning. And that's a problem. It's not that we cannot live with that. We can, but it makes things more expensive, and merchandise have to go around Africa. So it's something that has to be solved. And that's why I think that the last operation that we carried out against the power station in Yemen was carried out by the Navy, not by the Air Force. First of all, we have spare capacity for the Navy, and secondly, it's something that has to do with the port of Eilat. It has to be open. And we can charge the Houthis heavier prices. And I think this is what you're going to see now in the coming weeks. We shall charge the Houthis a heavier price in order to convince them to change their course. They did move from having a missile a day to having a missile a week, which was a nice development. But this is not enough. We want them to lift the siege over the Bab el-Mandeb area so that ships that do make their way to Israel will be able to go through to navigate through the straits without worrying about being attacked. And let's remember that what they did recently, they escalated the activity against the maritime activities, and decided to act against anybody who has any connection with Israel, regardless of whether they are going to Eilat or not. And this forced us to take action because this is unacceptable. We have to protect the shipping of international shipping towards Israel, even if it's not directed to this time to Eilat. Ships that were supposed to come to, that had in the past come to Tel Aviv, to Ashdod, were attacked as well. This is totally unacceptable. Not that closing the Eilat port is acceptable, but this is even more unacceptable.
Indeed. The international response to this is also deafening, and it really doesn't make much sense for the United States and its European allies, particularly those who are impacted, particularly by this, to include also Greece, which had several of its vessels struck. Where is the Hellenic Navy? I mean, they pride themselves by this Navy, and it doesn't seem to do much. So there are a lot of question marks about this situation, and it also raises question as to what messaging, again, is being signaled towards China. But Dr. Duran, we have 4 minutes, and still I would like to touch on the situation in Lebanon. Tom Barak, ambassador to Turkey, envoy to Lebanon and Syria, was this morning in Beirut for a meeting with the president. What can you tell us about that?
Jonathan, he is working towards some kind of agreement between Israel and Lebanon. The tenor of his statement sounded like he thinks the onus is now on Israel to make some sort of gesture or concession. That's after the parliament in Lebanon voted in favor of disarming Hezbollah. I don't want to read too much into these statements. I don't know exactly where the negotiation behind the scenes stands, but there is a warning to us all there, I think, in equating from elements like the Lebanese government, the Iranian proxies, equating symbolic gestures with tangible concessions. The Iranians, the Lebanese, the former Assad regime, they are masters, all of them. Assad is gone now, but they're masters when dealing with the Americans of trading process for tangible concession. You saw that for example, in the nuclear negotiations with Obama. The mere fact that the Iranians sat down at the table to negotiate led the Americans to give them sanctions relief, which strengthened them. And the Iranians are very good at calling for I would call it the ratchet effect, where the concessions only go in one direction, and you can never reverse them. So when we Americans are negotiating with Middle Easterners, I think it's very important to trade like for like. A actual process of disarming Hezbollah, where Hezbollah hands over weapons depots, hands over heavy weaponry, takes men, decommissions men from service, and so on. That is a tangible act of disarmament, which you might then turn to the Israelis and ask for some kind of tangible act in return. A vote in parliament, it's a poem. It's not an action.
Well, quite frankly, it means nothing when we're talking about this context. The leader of Hezbollah, Secretary General Naim Qassem, after the National Security Advisor of the Supreme Council, Larijani, visited Beirut, came out and stated, we're not willing to do so. We're not willing to disarm. We're willing to talk with you, but not about this. And if you come and confront us about this, Lebanon will burn. So it seems like this is quite a precarious situation to be in, where Ambassador Barak comes and says, yes, they've done their part now. It's Israel's part to be played. And you ask yourself, okay, what part did they exactly plan other than call upon the army to devise a plan that will be implemented within year's end, potentially? They don't really want to put a time frame upon it. Many question marks. Last sentence, Dr. Duran, you have 8 seconds.
The Houthis are working on behalf of the Chinese, and again, we need to see this in the global context.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Duran, General Kupilvasa, thank you very much for all of your insights. I'd like also to thank all of you at home as well. This has been Deep Dive, Hudson Institute's Deep Dive from Jerusalem and Washington, D.C. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.